morning. I'm happy to have all of you here with us today. All the seats are full except for the front row. Apparently I don't want to get too close. That's okay. Not how it always is. And thank you to those who are watching online with us every week. We're happy to have y'all join us. My name is Shirley Haugen, and we are studying the book of Genesis. We have been studying Genesis. We've learned about Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And now, of course, we've been talking about Jacob's sons and the 12 boys, and all the trouble that they get into. And today we're going to focus again on a couple of Jacob's sons. We're going to talk a lot about Joseph, of course, today. We'll get into a little bit of Judah as well. And so, we had our story last week where there was a lot of favoritism going on, and that led to sibling rivalry and jealousy. So we talked a lot about jealousy last week. And of course, we know that Joseph got his coat of many colors from his father, and so Jacob wasn't helping matters any when he so blatantly showed his favoritism toward his favorite son, Joseph. So we know that Joseph's brothers hated him. They couldn't stand him. And, it really started with the mothers, right? Because some of the boys were born to Leah. Joseph was born to Rachel, and Rachel was Jacob's favorite, beloved wife. And that jealousy and that hatred, I think, just really got passed down. And so the boys hated Joseph, the son of Rachel, so much that they wanted to kill him. And thankfully, the older brother, Reuben, convinced him not to kill him, just to throw him in a pit. Just throw him in a pit. And Reuben, I think, had the mind that he was going to go back later and save him. But then Judah, another one of Leah's sons, said, hey, why don't we sell him for cash? So they sold him into slavery to the Ishmaelites. And so it just wasn't good. So today we're going to be in chapter 39, and we're going to be talking about what happened next to Joseph. After his brother sold him into slavery, what happened? So we'll be getting into that in chapter 39. In between last week's lesson in chapter 37 and this week's lesson in chapter 39, there's chapter 38, which I know we're not supposed to focus on, but it's a little chapter snuck in there about Judah. And I do think it's important because Judah is the one that was chosen to be in the line of Jesus. So we know that Joseph was chosen to save Israel, but Judah was the one chosen to be in the line of Jesus. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And so just a little disclaimer here as we get into chapter 38. We'll do a little summary of that chapter. If you're uncomfortable hearing about the birds and the bees, you might want to close your ears. There are some adult situations in this story, so just bear with me. It's all in the Bible. But if you're a little funny about it, just bear with us. So what we know happened is that Judah ended up marrying a Canaanite woman. Now, this woman doesn't have a name in the Bible. All we know is that she is the daughter of Shua. So Judah ends up having 3 sons with this daughter of Shua: Onan, and Shelah. And it actually says, then Judah said, let me go back further. It's this starting in verse 2 of 38. He married her, the daughter of Shua, and made love to her. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son who was named She conceived again and gave birth to a son and named him Onan. She gave birth still to another son and named him Shelah. So just like that, Judah had 3 sons. Now Judah got a wife for his oldest son, And when Judah did this, there was some weird happenings with and the Bible doesn't tell us what wicked, evil things were happening. But we know that starting in verse 6, it says, Judah got a wife for her firstborn, and her name was his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death. So we don't know what he did, but we know he is no longer. God just got rid of him. And then in verse 8 it says, then Judah said to Onan, the second son, this is straight from the Bible, Sleep with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to raise up offspring for your brother. But Onan knew that the child would not be his. So whenever he slept with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from providing offspring for his brother. What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight. So the Lord put him to death also. So Onan, as the second oldest brother, was supposed to take in the wife of his dead brother and provide her with a son. And he didn't want to do that. And so God struck him dead too. He's gone. So now we've got Shayla left.
I have a question on that.
Yeah.
See, I read it differently.
Mm-hmm.
I read it that he was put down because he was sleeping with his brother's wife.
He was supposed to sleep with her and provide an heir.
Is that what God told him to do? Or is
that was kind of the kinsman redeemer thing. He was supposed to take care of her and provide children. It was the way he could honor his deceased brother.
Okay.
So he was supposed to marry her and sleep with her and make a family with her. So good point you brought up. So the whole concept of the kinsman redeemer, when a husband passes away like that, usually there's a brother who steps in and takes care of the widow who's left behind. And so in those days, they would marry them and try to have children with them, especially if he didn't have any children of his own before he passed away. So he was supposed to take in Tamar and marry her, sleep with her, provide an heir that would have been basically for his brother. But the problem was, as you can see by the story, he didn't want to do that. He didn't mind sleeping with her, but he didn't want to get her pregnant with and honor his brother by giving his brother's honor and memory a son. And so because of that, that's why God struck him. Now, we don't know what he did. We just know the Bible says he's wicked. So what he did, we don't know, but we kind of get an idea of what Onan did or didn't do. And that's why God struck him. So it's kind of a weird situation. Now, Shayla was younger, so he wasn't old enough yet to take Tamar on as a wife and to be a kinsman redeemer. So if you look at what happened, let's see, what verse is that? In verse 11, Judah then said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Live as a widow in your father's household until my son Shayla grows up." For he thought he may die too, just like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's household. Now, that's what happened. So Shayla was too young. Tamar went to live with Judah in his household. So we don't know why, but for some reason, as Shayla grew up, Judah never gave Tamar to Shayla to be his wife. And if you read the story, you get the idea that she was very upset about that. I don't know, maybe she was hurt. She was mad that and upset that Judah, and it doesn't tell us why, but for some reason, even when Shayla was old enough, he didn't give Tamar to him to be his wife. So after Judah's wife died, this unnamed daughter of Shua passed away, and after he finished grieving, Judah went on a trip with a friend to a place called Timnah, where his sheep were being sheared. And Tamar heard about this upcoming trip that he was going to be making with his friend. And so she kind of cooked up a little plan. She decided that she would change out of her widow's clothes and she put a veil over her face to disguise herself. And then she went and she sat and waited at the entrance of a place called Enaim, which is on the way to Timnah. And then when Judah was coming along with his friend on his way, he saw this woman with a veil there, and he thought she was a prostitute. And Judah, seeing what he perceived to be a prostitute, decided he would partake in her services. Genesis 38:16 says this: "Not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, he went over to her by the roadside and said, 'Come now, let me sleep with you.' 'And what will you give me to sleep with you?' she asked. 'I'll send you a young goat from my flock,' he said. "Will you give me something as a pledge until you send it?" she asked. He said, "What pledge should I give you?" "Your seal and its cord and the staff in your hand," she answered. So he gave them to her and slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. After she left, she took off her veil and put on her widow's clothes again. So now Judah's wife has passed away, and he has slept with Tamar, his daughter-in-law, but not knowing that this was his daughter-in-law, he thought she was a prostitute, that he just met some random prostitute out on the road. So this is what's going on, and she gets pregnant. So now Judah made good on his promise to the prostitute, and he sent his friend with a goat back to that area where he'd slept with the prostitute to pay her for his services. But when his friend got there, he couldn't find the prostitute. And the locals told his friend that there was no prostitute there. And so they didn't really know what to do, and they didn't know how to get his personal items back that he had given to the prostitute as a pledge. And then in verse 20, starting in verse 24, it says this: "About 3 months later, Judah was told, 'Your daughter-in-law, Tamar, is guilty of prostitution, and as a result, she is now pregnant.' Judah said, 'Bring her out and have her burned to death.'" Get this, the man who slept with the prostitute is demanding that this prostitute daughter-in-law be burned and put to death. Is that a double standard?
It said she was a Canaanite.
After she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. "I am pregnant by the man who owns these," she said. And she added, "See if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are." Judah recognized them and said, "She is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah." And he did not sleep with her again. But of course, he'd already impregnated her. So Tamar later gave birth to 2 twin sons, Perez and Zerah. And if you read about the birth of these twins, there was a little jostling around in the womb before the twins were born. In fact, the midwife, one of the twins, had put its hand out first. And of course, they thought that was going to be the firstborn. So she wrapped or tied a scarlet thread around the little wrist so they could mark which twin was the new firstborn. But there was some jostling around in the womb, and the hand came back inside the womb, and then another baby popped out first. Not the one with the red thread tied around it. So Perez had jostled around and ended up being the firstborn twin. And Zerah came second, and he was the one who stuck his hand out and then pulled it back in, and he ended up being the second born twin. And I don't know about y'all, but this kind of reminds me, this jostling around of twins inside the womb is very reminiscent of what Jacob and Esau did inside of Rebekah when she was carrying her twins. So these twin boys are born, and Perez, the firstborn twin, he is the one who is chosen to be in the line of Jesus. And so I think this story is interesting for that reason. It is so fascinating to see that God uses flawed and sinful people. And he uses these people to bring us redemption through Jesus. So I just love that. So now we get to go back to our story, our real story for today, which is our story about Joseph in chapter 39. So at the beginning of chapter 39, now y'all remember Joseph had been sold into slavery by his brothers. If you start reading in verse 1, it says, "Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and all and of all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was in everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. So he trusted Joseph so much that he knew Joseph was running the show, both inside the house and outside. And then at the end of verse 6, we see this verse. Now Joseph was well built and handsome. And you know that's going to lead to trouble, right? Dave, will you read for us Genesis 39 verses 7 through 21,
Sure.
right after now Joseph was well built and handsome?
Sure. It came after these events that his master's wife looked with desire at Joseph and said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Behold, with me here my master does not have to concern himself with anything in the house, and he has put all that he owns in my charge. There is no one greater in this house than I, and he has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do this great and evil sin against God?" And she spoke to Joseph day after day, and he didn't listen to her, lie beside her, or be with her. Now it happened one day that he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the household were inside. She caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." And he left his garment in her hand and fled and went outside. When she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled, when she saw he had left his hand in her garment and fled outside, she called to the men of her household and said to them, "See, he has brought a Hebrew to us, made sport of us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I screamed. When he heard that, I raised my voice and screamed, and he let his garment beside me and fled and went outside." So she left his garment beside her until his master came home. Then she spoke to him with these words: "The Hebrew slave whom you brought to us came in to make sport of me. And as I raised my voice and screamed, he left his garment beside me and fled." 21, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Now when his master heard these words of his wife, which she spoke to him, saying, "This is what your slave did to me," his anger burned. So Joseph's master took him and put him into jail, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in jail. But the Lord was with Joseph, and he extended kindness to him and gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer.
Thank you, Dave.
Sure.
So Joseph was bought by Potiphar to be his slave, and we know that God was with Joseph, and he prospered Joseph, and so by default prospered all of Potiphar's household. And then because Joseph was well built and handsome, Potiphar's wife was taking notice of him around the place, right? I'm sure she admired his form, but I'm sure she also admired and respected his diligent work and all the success that he was bringing to their household. So she was just enamored with him. She desired him and she wanted him, but Joseph was a good young man and he refused her advances. Joseph didn't want to sin against Potiphar, and more importantly, Joseph was a wise young man and he didn't want to sin against God either. This reminds me of David after he had the affair with Bathsheba. In Psalm 51:4, he said, "Against you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight. So you are right in your verdict and justified when you judge." So David was acknowledging that when he engaged in sexual sin and had sex with Bathsheba, another man's wife, he was sinning against God.
Who was it that came to David and told him that you stole a poor man's, or blah, blah, blah?
That was Nathan.
Nathan, yeah.
That was Nathan. And of course, we know David sent Bathsheba's husband to the front line so that he would be killed in battle.
Hittite, yeah.
So he found a way to get rid of him.
And he was one of David's mighty men too. I mean, he was a revered.
He was a good warrior.
Yeah.
And so there was this acknowledgement by David when he sinned that he was really sinning against God, and that's Joseph. Joseph knew that if he did sleep with Potiphar's wife, he wouldn't just be sinning against Potiphar, but he would also be sinning against God himself. And Potiphar's wife continued to beg Joseph to sleep with her. This was going on For a long time, she was trying to get him. And then, of course, this one day when all the household servants just happened to be out somewhere and there was nobody there but them. I mean, I kind of have to think that maybe she made that happen so that she would have an opportunity to really put some pressure on him. And I think she thought he would succumb to the pressure, but he didn't. He didn't. And then she is like a scorned woman. And I love this story because it says she grabs his cloak and he goes off running. One of the commentaries I read said that back in those days, the slaves wore cloaks or garments that were kind of like a loincloth. Now, I don't know if that's what Joseph was wearing, because maybe he had on more of a robe type of a garment since he was in a position of authority. But whatever cloak she grabbed hold of and he ran off without it, it left him at least partially undressed when he ran.
Would have probably been totally naked.
And it could have been totally. He might have been naked or partially naked when he had to flee that scene and get away from her. So it's kind of a funny story in that regard.
It would imply if his cloak was left there that he had been disrobed.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, and that's what she uses
That's
to
what she
entrap,
did, yeah.
And used it against him.
Exactly. So she caught his cloak and she used that. It's like she's kind of setting the stage. She's trying to build her case against Joseph using that cloak. And it says she calls in her servants and she begins telling them what he did to her, what he tried to do to her. And she's already building this case against Joseph with her household servants before Potiphar comes in. And then, of course, when Potiphar gets there, she's presenting her case to him. And she's saying that, basically, she's accusing Joseph of evil intent. Accusing Joseph of wanting to rape her. She made it sound like she was the innocent victim in this story. And really, she was the one who was going after Joseph. And so when Potiphar heard what had happened, or he heard his wife's version of what had happened, he burned with anger against Joseph. And Potiphar threw Joseph in prison. I thought it was interesting that even though Potiphar, it says he burned with anger against Joseph, he just threw him in prison. In those days, he could have had Joseph killed. He could have had him burned to death, or he could have done anything. He could have done whatever he wanted to. So I think there was a part of Potiphar who respected Joseph and was grateful for him, and he didn't really want to kill him. So he had him thrown in prison. It was a prison where the king kept his prisoners, and I'm sure it had a reputation for not being a good place to be. And so if you think about it, Joseph's life has just gone from bad to worse. Think of all the things that happened to Joseph. His brothers threw him in a pit or a cistern because they wanted to kill him. Then they decided to sell him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites. He's sold into slavery. And who knows what the Ishmaelites were doing to him before he ended up getting bought by Potiphar. And then now this woman, Potiphar's wife, is falsely accusing him of sleeping with her, even attempting to rape her. And now he's stuck in this king's prison, which I'm sure was not a pleasant place to be. I'm sure you can imagine the kind of cruelty that would have gone on in that kind of a prison in those days. But God, all these bad things were happening to Joseph, but God. Listen to this. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. And I love this. So while Joseph was probably at his lowest moment, God was there with him, and God showed favor on him. And this cycle seems to be repeating in Joseph's life, right? God granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. It says in verse 22, so the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. So it's what happened in Potiphar's household, it happened again in prison with the prison warden. So no matter what Joseph did, it seems like God elevated him wherever he was. When he was a slave, in Potiphar's house and when he was a prisoner in this prison, God still blessed him and gave him success in whatever he did. So whatever his circumstances, even when it doesn't look like, if you just looked at his circumstances, it didn't look like God was blessing him. But he was. He was there blessing him in the worst of the circumstances. So as a slave, God was with Joseph when he prospered him in Potiphar's house. As a prisoner, God was with him and showed him kindness, and he found favor in the eyes of the warden, ended up being in charge of all the other prisoners. And there's this theme here, and I think it's a theme that we really need to understand. There are times when we have circumstances in our lives that are not to our liking. And how do we respond? How do we respond? Do we complain? Do we have a bad attitude? Do we get mad at God for allowing bad things to happen to us? Oh, why is me? Do we take out our frustrations on those around us? You know, bad things are happening to us and we're upset, so don't we tend to bark at other people and take it out on those around us? And some people use their misfortune as an excuse to treat other people badly.
Or an excuse to quit.
Yeah, exactly. An excuse to quit and do nothing and just wallow in our depression. You're right. So there's a lot of different ways we can respond when we end up in these bad situations and bad circumstances. But look at how Joseph responded. Is there any mention anywhere of Joseph ever once complaining? It's just not there. I don't think he did. I don't think he complained. Is there any mention anywhere in any of these verses of Joseph having a bad attitude or a chip on his shoulder? Did he complain about being a victim? There's no indication that Joseph ever got upset or complained about his situation. And Lord knows he had reason to be upset.
Well, he probably stopped that when they threw him when he went out with his coat of many colors, got all cocksure of himself, and they threw him in the pit. You know, he probably, I don't know. You know,
Little self-analysis.
Yeah, a little self-analysis. And they probably, I mean, that little reflection. You know?
I don't know
Yeah.
why he was so, how he responded in such a positive way to such negative situations.
And he always did his very best for whoever.
Yeah,
He did.
Work as
He
though
did.
working for the Lord.
And you know, there's no mention in the stories of him talking bad. He didn't talk badly about his brothers. How many of us, if our siblings had done, would we not be bad-mouthing them and cursing them?
And his brothers were worried that he was going to hold it.
Exactly.
Yeah, when they
And
went
so
to
you don't
Graham.
hear him
Yeah.
bad-mouthing his brothers. You don't hear him bad-mouthing his master, Potiphar. I mean, there's no complaining. He look at what it says he did. I mean, he worked diligently. He worked diligently for his new master.
I think there's a model there for Christians. I think
Yes.
he did some self-analysis, and I think he was grateful that he wasn't killed, because that was that's what looked like was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So we should be grateful that God provided a way for us.
That's exactly
And,
right.
you know, so I think he modeled that type of behavior.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say much the same thing. I think he's kind of a double picture for us, because he's kind of a picture of sanctification, because although, you know, we have to be sanctified from like terrible things we do, and when we do say bad things, and you're right, we don't see him acting ugly in any way, except I think it's just a picture of maturing. Because at the beginning of the story, if I was one of his brothers, I would have wanted to smack him too, because
He was bragging.
arrogant, braggadocious. He was young and he was full of himself. And so we see him being about what I know, and he's kind of like a Tara Leaf Cobble. He needs to and don't let it puff me up, you know. And so I think he is being matured so that God can really use it. I mean, we had those dreams to foreshadow what's going to come, but he is being matured so that God's really going to use him more, almost like a type for Christ in the saving of the people. You know,
Mhm.
He is a type.
He is a
he's
type of
gonna
Christ,
be used
yeah.
as to show us growth and maturity,
Mm-hmm.
which needs to happen to all of us. and then he's gonna be used to show us this is what Jesus is gonna do for you one day.
That's right. And when he's in the midst of these horrible circumstances, he just does his job.
Right.
He does it well. He works diligently, whether it's for Potiphar or then later the prison warden. And I love that. And then he also fled from sin. He fled from sexual sin. What young man would be able to resist a woman who was coming after him day after day after day? And he resisted her.
Mm-hmm.
That's not easy for a young man to do. And so he just really, Joseph gives us such a positive example of how to respond when life gives you lemons, right?
Exactly.
He had lots of lemons in his life, and he responded. I would say he passed a few tests when he was in these adverse situations.
You know, it's also another example of how when we do honor the Lord, God blesses us because Joseph will be blessed. I mean, he's going through the trials here and he's in the fire and he's got the lemons all over the place, but God is going to bless him and use him.
And I think that's God being with him and blessing him in the midst of these horrible circumstances is such a reminder to us. Because when we're in the midst of dark pits in our life, it's so good to look to somebody like that and see how they respond. It's a reminder that we have a choice in how we respond to all the stuff this life throws at us, right? And I'm sure there have been times when all of us have felt like we've been treated unfairly. Have you ever been hurt by friends and family? We've all had temptations that we felt like they're too much for us to bear. We've all been put in situations where we don't like our job, or we don't like our boss, or that we don't like where we are, or our coworkers, or fill in the blank, right? There's always things that get thrown at us that maybe we don't like. But when those things happen to us, we're in good company. That's what happened with Joseph. And so we know that Joseph worked diligently no matter what or who he worked for. Colossians 3, this is verse 23 and 24. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. And so that is what Joseph does, and that's what we should do when we get hit by all this kind of life injustice. And then Joseph kept his faith in God in unfair circumstances. He didn't get mad at God. You don't hear any mention of him getting mad at God or questioning God. Why me, Lord? Hebrews 13, 5 and 6 say, God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. So we say with confidence, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? So God is always with us. And when bad things happen to us, we don't need to get mad at God. We need to remember that he's with us, especially in the dark moments. Paul in the New Testament also had something to teach us about how to respond during unfair life circumstances. I mean, we know Paul had his thorn in the flesh, and God revealed his strength in Paul's weaknesses. And Paul was imprisoned. And think all the stories where Paul is in prison, he's in chains, and he wrote 5 letters while he was in Roman custody. 5 letters. Paul was beaten, shipwrecked, cold, hungry, imprisoned. Paul wanted to be out sharing the gospel, but there were times where he could not physically go out and share the gospel like he wanted to. But he didn't just sit around thinking, woe is me. He was busy writing, even when he was in chains or he was under house arrest. He was writing letters. He worked diligently writing letters. And because Paul wrote those letters when he couldn't go out in person and spread the news, because of those letters, he continues to spread the good news of the gospel even today to all of us. And so his work that he did while he was in prison is still benefiting the world even today. And you know, maybe in this story, Joseph got hit. I'm pointing to Judah, not Joseph. Maybe Joseph, because I don't have the family tree of Jacob up there. But maybe Joseph got his work ethic from his father, Jacob. Because remember when Jacob went to find his bride, Rachel, he ended up working for 20 years for his evil father-in-law.
Laban.
Yeah, he worked for Laban, and he worked for 7 years so he could earn Rachel as his bride, and then he got tricked into marrying Leah, and he had to work another 7 years to re-earn Rachel as his bride. And then when he wanted to leave, he got talked into staying another 6 years so he could breed sheep.
Yeah.
And so he ended up spending 20 years. And again, when you read through that story, there's nothing in that story that indicates that Jacob complained. He worked diligently, and because of his work, that entire household was blessed and prospered. So, like father, like son with Joseph, it's kind of like the same thing happened. So Joseph in this story today in chapter 39, he does teach us something really important. And Joseph is teaching us and reminding us that God is our reward. I don't know if y'all remember, but back when we were talking about Abraham, there was a story in Abraham where he had to go and rescue his nephew Lot. Remember, all the kings around Sodom and Gomorrah were warring with each other and trying to conquer and kill each other. And when that happened, his nephew Lot, his whole household was taken captive along with the rest of the Sodomites. And when Abraham heard about this, Abraham went in and rescued Lot and his whole household, and he rescued all the kidnapped Sodomites as well. And because of Abraham, all those people were freed from the kings that were battling each other. And remember, at the time, the king of Sodom was so grateful to Abraham that he wanted to give him gifts and rewards as a thank you for saving them. But as you recall, Abraham refused those awards from the evil king of Sodom. In Genesis 14, it said, "But Abram said to the king of Sodom, 'With raised hand I have sworn an oath to the Lord, God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, that I will accept nothing belonging to you, not even a thread or the strap of a sandal, so that you will never be able to say, I made Abram rich.'" He didn't want anything from the king of Sodom. And, I know that Abram was concerned after that whole event happened. He was concerned that some of those other kings in the area might come after him and his family. And so he was a little bit afraid, and he had refused to take the rewards from the evil king of Sodom. And it was right after that God said to him, this was in Genesis 15, it said, "After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. 'Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield. I am your very great reward.'" So God was saying to Abraham, not only am I going to be here to protect you from all those that want to harm you, but Abraham, you don't need the rewards of the king of Sodom, because I am your great reward. Our relationship with God is our reward. And that's true for us today. Before Jesus, our relationship with God was broken because of our sin. It was because of Jesus' death and resurrection that sin no longer separates us from God. For those who believe in Jesus and follow him, we are now rejoined with God. We are remarried with God. We are the bride of Christ. God lives in us. And our relationship with God that was once severed by our sin, Jesus restores it. He came to save us because he loves us. And now our relationship with God is permanently repaired for those who believe. And when you think of God being with Abraham back when he said, "I will be your great reward," and then God was with Isaac and Jacob, and now in today's lesson he's with Joseph, and he blesses Joseph in everything he does. He kept Joseph from getting killed, and he blessed him. And God being with us, it wasn't just for those Old Testament men in these stories. God being with us, that invitation is open to all of us. Right? That is open to all of us. God invites all of us to be with him. That's what God wants. Remember, we said God is jealous for us to love him with all of our hearts and our soul and our mind. And the kids sang about this morning. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your mind, and all your strength. That's what God wants. He invites us to be in this personal relationship with him. And it's a theme. It's an eternal truth. God just wasn't with these guys back when these Old Testament stories were taking place. He wants to be with us now. He is our great reward. In Matthew 28:20, Jesus sums it up and he says, "And surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age." Bye.